Good morning, good afternoon. How you doing there today? This is David Robert for the Marketplace of Ideas podcast. I hope you're having a wonderful and great May. We are, I guess you could say, trouncing or preserving. No, that's not the word. Persevering through the month of May. It is May the 24th. And we are 7 months away from Christmas Eve, for those of you who are into that kind of thing. But just to let you know, as we are approaching the springtime here, look for a lot more episodes coming. We have some really great stuff. But wherever you are in the world today, you can find us, the Marketplace of Ideas podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, you name it. We've got a whole list of places you can find us. And I believe Google Play, you can get the podcast on Google until June the 23rd in Canada. I believe in the States, they've already kind of moved everything to YouTube. So you can now find all of the Google Play stuff you really love on their podcast on YouTube. And you can also find our podcast on YouTube. We have all of our episodes from the Marketplace of Ideas podcast. And also, we're going to get the Adult Fitness podcast up there as well. So look for that and stay tuned for more good stuff coming, right? So yeah, today we're going to be chatting about country music. Now, for those who know me or know me in person or in real life, they would know that I'm a large black man who grew up in Canada. Family is from the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, respectively. And I've, being raised in Canada, you realize that there's a lot of cultural norms that sometimes, if you're a person of color, may or may not hit you the right way. So growing up in Edmonton, Alberta, we were just at the right time and the right age to witness the rise of the Edmonton Oilers. They were then in the 70s an expansion team. I believe they went on to win 5 Stanley Cups, I want to say. I'm not too sure of the number. I probably should know this. They are in the playoffs currently right now with Wayne Gretzky's son, Connor McDavid. No, just kidding. I don't think he's his son, but the Oilers, let me see. How many cups are we talking here? Ay. They've won 5. That ain't no joke. That's nothing to sneeze at, right? So they were a dynasty, and you had everybody on that team, literally, and I kid you not, were all-stars, It was such an insane time to be alive, right? I mean, every spring we would have, heading down White Ave and into, downtown, we'd have either a cup of the Edmonton Oilers or the then Edmonton Eskimos, now the Edmonton Elks. So we were nicknamed the City of Champions, right? And we were nicknamed, we were winners, It was quite interesting, the number of players that I could rattle off, like Yari Curry, Paul Coffey, Mark Messier, Wayne Gretzky, Andy Moe, Glenn Anderson, Grant Fuhr, Kevin Lowe. Who else? Just all-stars, Dave Semenko. Rest in peace, right? Just so many players that were part of that organization. Glenn Sather, Peter Pocklington. It was one of the storied franchises in sports history. You have the Patriots, you've got the Chicago Bulls, you have the Magic, the Lakers, the Los Angeles Lakers. You have, who else? You've got, you've got the Red Wings, you've got the Boston Bruins, you've got the Montreal Canadiens, you have all of these teams, the Pittsburgh Penguins, just in all these various sports that, the Yankees, the Red Sox. And so Edmonton had that. And for a time, dare I say, Edmonton was probably the epicenter of all things hockey in the 80s, and the last cup that they won was in 1990, right before Mark Messier went to the New York Rangers, and I believe he won a cup with them as well. So, I mean, you're looking at a time period that was just unmatched and we'll never see again. And it can lead you to a lot of reminiscing about what happened, what went on back then. But because you grew up in this space, it was pretty easy to kind of get swept up in it. And the thing about growing up in an area where your family doesn't have a lot of roots, you know, you're a transplant, as it were. You are somebody that is a part of the culture because you're born into it, but you're not relatively seen as part of that culture because of the color of your skin, because it's maybe not your native language, or maybe you are somebody who was just, you know, brought there as a young child. So growing up, we had the Edmonton Oilers, you had the Trappers, you had the Edmonton then Eskimos. Pardon my language, I know it's an outdated term. You have now the Edmonton Elks, and it was awesome. But growing up, there was a lot of things that weren't so great. The residential school system was still going on when I was in elementary, well into high school. This system of, dare I say, I don't want to say internment, but it was definitely a way to assimilate our First Nations people into a European ideology, a European way of thinking. It has done unspeakable amounts of damage and harm, and it's something that Canada as a country, as a nation at whole, has just starting to wrestle with. And so there's so many more stories to be told on that front. But growing up, that's what was going on in our backyard, you know, and you would learn about every other culture except technically your own. And you somewhat kind of expect that, being somebody from another nation. Obviously, they're not going to delve into other countries and so forth and so on. But the idea of the fact that you would learn more about French Canadian history versus Haiti, or, you know, the continent of Africa, left a lot to be desired. And so growing up, you would listen to Cadillac Ranch, you would listen to the good old hockey game, you would listen to, you know, you'd watch Road to Avonlea, you'd watch Anne of Green Gables, you would partake in The Littlest Hobo, Beachcombers. I mean, we're talking like early 80s and into the 90s. And part of Canadian culture was that there was a lot of stuff that overlapped from American culture, but it still had that very much sense of what Canada is. And what a lot of people think of when they think of Canada is a moose, Mounties, you know, the Royal Mounted Police of Her Majesty's service. We think of maple syrup, toques, which are hats to the Americans, winter hats. We think of, what else? Hockey, curling. That's kind of what comes to mind. But Canada is so much more than that. It's this ethnic melting pot of cultures from all over the place. There's a huge, insane Ukrainian, Filipino population, Caribbean, African, just this multi-level mixing pot of people and various groups that make up what Canada is now. And within that, there was a lot of things that we were not, and when I say we, I mean like people of color, were not necessarily welcomed into. A lot of spaces that we were told we shouldn't be in. One such space was that of hockey. The former commissioner of hockey, the NHL, let me just see here. Let me see. So when I was coming up, it would have been John Ziegler, and then Gil Stein, and as of right now, it is Gary Bettman. So Gary Bettman has been part of the franchise. I believe he has been there for, 31 years. So that, it's crazy, And during the time period when I was, a kid, the mantra was they wanted to keep hockey. How should I put this? there was an overwhelming notion of racism. Let's just put it that way within hockey. And oh man, it was quite interesting. And so, there were white supremacy rules. The NHL and white Canada is to blame in one of these addressements here. It said, but it basically said they wanted to keep hockey white, if I'm not mistaken. And this was something that I remember growing up was sort of like a non-written rule. And one of the reasons why is the economic inequality within Canada based upon the fact that when you came to this country, you just didn't have a lot of resources. And so I'm not blaming anybody for racism or slavery that was born in the 80s, because you didn't own anybody when you were born in 1980 or 1990. But what would happen most of the time is if you came to another country, you were leaving your family, you were leaving your background, you were leaving your banking system, you were leaving your language, your culture, and you were taking on usually the role of a domestic house worker, cab driver. You didn't necessarily always have a better lifestyle. You were making more money, but in I guess you say in comparison to what you would make if you were born in this country and you had access to, various levels of education and family connections, you might start off on a higher leg. So a great example of this is my mother came to Canada, God rest her soul, in the 70s, in the mid to early 70s there. And when she came, she was illegal. But what happened is she was able to get a job working as a maid for this rich family in Toronto. I believe it was a Jewish family. The wife was a lawyer, and the husband was either a doctor or a real estate mogul or something of that nature. And they would leave out money when she was cleaning to see if she would take it or not. And she would be like, oh, you left this, you left that. And she was pretty diligent with her work and everything. And what happened next is they said, okay, we'll sponsor you. And that family sponsored them. And what's really interesting is I would have loved to have met those people. I've never thought of this before until now, but those people directly or pretty much are responsible for my mother being able to stay here, because once my dad came here, he was illegal and he was ducking immigration, met my mom through mutual friends, and they got together, got married, and because of that, my dad was able to get his citizenship, and then they moved to Alberta, and the rest, as they say, is history. But what transpired, or what took place, was here was my my family coming into Canada, but they were starting with not a lot. You come to this country with a suitcase and a dream and hard work and dedication, and before you know it, you're trying to do as well as the people who were born here, And what would happen, unfortunately, is, when it comes to hockey and things of that nature, it's just a very, very expensive sport. So when you come from another country and you're struggling trying to make it, and what normally actually happens is you have family that you have to send money back home to. So you might have a relative or a brother or an aunt or a grandmother who is also depending on not only what you send them financially, but also what you send them as far as clothing or food goods or anything like that. Because when you transfer the money over to the Caribbean and other nations, it can double or triple. And there's some countries like the Philippines where their GDP, a good portion of it, 10 to 15% of it, is money that gets sent back from other countries through cash apps and sort of other apps that money is sent through so that they can survive. And a lot of times you might even have family that raised money to send you to Canada. So you're not only, morally indebted, sometimes you are financially indebted to them as well. But yeah, there was economic inequality in that sense, in that you were just starting with a lot less. And hockey is a very, very expensive sport. Hockey is not cheap. The skates, the gear, tournaments, the fees, it can cost a lot of money. And if you don't have disposable income, And if you're just struggling just to get by, it's going to be kind of hard and difficult to justify spending X amount of dollars to play a sport at that you may not take it past the level of, of junior or somebody that's just playing kind of for fun. If you're not good enough to make it pro, chances are you're just going to be playing street hockey, which is fine, which is a culture of Canada, because it just requires a stick, maybe some a safety mask for your face, and you just go to town, right? You got a net, tennis ball, and you're off to the races. And some of the coolest things about growing up in Canada is that I grew up playing street hockey, right? And you just get a stick and maybe some gloves if you're lucky, and you just play. And, the universal yelling of car, as, a car is approaching, you move the net, drive by, and you keep going. And so it was fun, but growing up, you did see that kind of difference. And what we found, particularly when growing up in Canada, was the love of country music, the love of the rural, rustic sort of aesthetic of living, particularly if you lived in Alberta or Saskatchewan, and in the West, right? There is quite the identity within Alberta and the Western provinces about the rugged outdoorsman, the sort of Marlboro man, if you would, the guy who's trying to tame the West and comes out and strikes his claim, and through hard work and dedication and raising a family and all that. And a lot of that stems from the closeness that Alberta and Saskatchewan have to states such as Montana in the United States. And so there's a lot of connection there. There's a lot of connective tissue, if you would, between that state and the province of Alberta. And so we definitely see quite the what's the word I'm looking for? Quite the appreciation and the connection to the country lifestyle, horses, raising horses, cattle, farming, that kind of thing. And it oftentimes connects itself to a conservative kind of lifestyle, voting conservative. Alberta has namely and mostly always voted blue, which is the UCP, United Conservative Party. We have pockets of the NDP, but it's normally, the Liberals never. I mean, there is some footholds of the Liberal Party in Alberta, but it's few and far between, right? And it is changing with the demographics and stuff, and that's a whole other podcast, let me tell you right there. But what I found growing up was there was a lot of things that you didn't really talk about unless you were at home, because just for the fact that you were in a country that was not of your background. And so hockey was a part of that. Curling was a part of that. A lot of the food was a part of that. And it was funny, growing up, you had to find places where you can get traditional food that was, catered to the tastes of the Caribbean or Haiti or the Dominican Republic or Cuba or China or wherever else. And it's commonplace now to go into like a superstore or a Loblaws or wherever and find the ethnic section is quite large and almost, ubiquitous with everything else. But back in the day, it was you had to go to the little island shop to get your roti or your goat meat or your cuts of ackee and saltfish or whatever was traditional for your upbringing or your parents' and grandparents' upbringing. Because part of it was there was this fear, and I remember talking to my brother about this many years ago, where the idea is that you leave your country of origin for a better life. There might be civil war, there might be disease, there might be unrest, you name it. And what you want to do is create a better life for your kids. I know for a fact that had my parents not left their respective countries, their offspring, being me and my brother, or whatever offspring would have happened if my parents didn't meet, wherever you are grown or raised, that's how you're going to die. So if you're raised poor, you're going to die poor, right? There's very little middle ground. There's very little rungs of the middle class that you can rise up to, and various few programs that you can access, like in Canada, in the United States. This is why a lot of times when people talk about how crazy it is to live in Canada, I'm always reminding them that it's ridiculously fortunate to live in a country like this, because You have access to so many resources that, I mean, just for the fact that if you have the brain capacity of a 10-year-old and you can push a broom, you can still not grow up on the street. That's something that can't be said for a lot of other countries in the world. A lot of other countries, if you are born into poverty, you're going to die into poverty. And so my parents had the courage to leave and to find a better life, as so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Canadians and Americans have done. But what happens, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, is there are parts of that culture that may seem foreign or might want to keep you out of it. And one such culture is country music. Now, the funny thing about country music is it has its roots in the Black American experience, i.e., the descendants of slaves that brought over instruments such as the banjo, that brought over blues, that brought over soul, that brought over the Negro spirituals, as it were, and rhythm and blues, and playing music in the Chitlin circuit and things of that nature. But what you saw growing up, particularly in the early part of the last century, was this rhythm that came from the descendants of African slaves that were brought over through the transatlantic slave trade. And these songs would be played in the South, in Florida, in Alabama, Kentucky, Mississippi, all of these states that were red states and that were predominantly, pro-slavery. And that music was then taken and was divided. So you'd have black music, you'd have quote-unquote music that would be referred to as jungle music by racist radio programmers and DJs. And slowly but surely, what was originally, black rhythm and blues and R&B slowly mutated or, evolved or devolved, whatever you want to call it, into what passes today for country music. And so growing up, I always associated country music with racism. I always associated it with the good old boys like the Dukes of Hazzard, which is kind of funny because I got a podcast coming about the Dukes of Hazzard, and we used to watch it. And being that my family was from the Caribbean, they didn't have any idea of what the Confederate flag on the General Lee actually meant. So here you had my parents have us watching Dukes of Hazzard on Sunday nights in the 80s, the reruns anyways. And, we're watching it, loving it as the Duke boys are getting away from Boss Hogg and they're blowing the horn. And we're thinking, all right, and that was the Confederate horn. It was nuts. But I associated country music with racism. I associated it with bigotry. I associated it with the Confederate flag, the people who wanted to keep selling black people instead of free them, which is one of the, if not the main cause of the civil rights, or the Civil War that took place in America. That brother fighting against brother. And so, yeah, I recall just listening, once I hear a twang or a pickup truck, if I were ever to see like a cowboy hat or a belt buckle or a set of spurs, I was transported to a place where I thought the Klan was right next door. I legitimately, until the ages of my mid-20s, I associated all country music with hatred and intolerance. Now, to be clear, there were plenty of artists that I listened to back in the 80s and the 90s, like Vince Gill, Reba McEntire, Garth Brooks, the Dixie Chicks, who else? Travis Tritt, I believe. There was Brooks and Dunn. I mean, when I was growing up, you had to understand that back in the 80s and the 90s, radio was pretty racist, and the idea of playing black music outside of like R&B or gospel or pop really didn't happen. You'd have to wait until like the college radio stations, and then the advent of like, music videos such as MTV, music video channels like MTV and Much Music in Canada, where we saw a lot more music from people that looked like us, that spoke to us, spoke to people of color. And so growing up, you would hear a lot of country music. You'd hear a lot of the Vince Gills and and all of these guys, or the Faith Hills, or the Keith Urbans, or who else? That's all I can think of right now. So we would listen to these guys on the radio stations and stuff, and every now and again you'd get like an Anita Baker, or you'd get, whatever. But for the most part, you had a lot of country in Alberta, and they weren't bad songs. I mean, they were great songwriters, and they had a lot of melody and everything else, but you just did not see yourself within that space. It was probably the most, I want to say, the most least diverse industry I had ever seen. And you just realized, okay, well, that's just not for me. You recognize that your place probably wasn't in that genre. Even though you had the Neville Brothers, you would later on have Darius Rucker. You would have people such as, he's a gentleman that I've thought of for years, like John Lee Hooker, B.B. King. Ray Charles even had a gospel country album, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a lot of history within black people that have played country music. Charlie Pride, a famous black country artist, but they just were never given their due. And the industry, the Country Music Association of America, just did not recognize them. And so they were either regulated to backup singers or just not at all. And things are slowly starting to change. And I've got a list of some of the country artists that I've kind of been following over the last little bit that are people of color. But for the most part, it remains quite a homogenous area, which, again, no shade or no complaint, but it is what it is. And lo and behold, as of earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm going to check my notes, let me just see here. We had, from Beyonce Knowles, Beyonce of Destiny's Child fame, married to Sean Carter, one of the, if not the, one of the most beautiful women on the face of this earth. My wife would admit probably the same as well. She is a force to be reckoned with, somebody who has won numerous awards. I mean, just it's quite a list if we were to go over it. She I mean, I'm reading through it and I don't even believe it. She's won Grammy Award for the Song of the Year. She's won Billboard Music Awards. She's won Grammys for Best Rap Song. Wow, I didn't know that. She's won Best R&B Song, MTV Music Awards, Best Female Pop Performance, Michael Jackson Video Vanguard Award. She's won Best Progressive R&B Album for her Lemonade 2017. We've got MTV Europe. She has won the BET Award for Video of the Year. She's been a fashion icon, People's Choice Awards, you name it. Like this, it goes on. It's actually quite. It's hard to believe that one person could do all of this, right? And you look at somebody like a Michael Jackson or Taylor Swift or Elton John. I mean, my gosh, But all that to say, she is very, very talented, and she's been able to. She's been able to share that talent for the better part of almost 2 decades. Actually, probably well over 2 decades. And so the story goes as this. Let me go see her story for her. She put out a country album earlier this year. And it raised a lot of eyebrows. So what had happened? Hold on, I'm looking this up here. There we go. So here we go. On the first track of Beyonce's new album, she seems to state the impetus behind the project. They used to say I spoke too country. Then the rejection came. Said I wasn't country enough. That rejection was an unnamed experience in which she said she did not feel welcomed and assumed to be her performance of her country album. Somebody wrote here that Beyonce's country album drowns out the black music history it claims to celebrate. So we're gonna read from that a little bit. It's from The Guardian. It was written just last month. But what had happened was she had received racist backlash from her infamous 2016 Country Music Awards performance. She said that the show removed clips from its social media, and Cowboy Carter is Beyonce's response. So the album in and of itself came out earlier this year, and it was her basically, I don't want to say middle finger, but just her statement to the country music industry that, hey, I'm Beyonce and I could make whatever album I want. Now, I've heard certain pundits and certain talking heads discuss the fact that Beyonce is Beyonce. She is like Cher, Adele, Madonna. She's like one word and you know who she is. You know her history with Destiny's Child. You know when she went solo, you could really say that it was Beyonce's child. I know that was always the running joke. But Beyonce, as a force to be reckoned with, could put out any music she wants. And she felt disrespected, she felt minimized, and she felt like she had been, I don't want to say targeted, but at least looked upon with a little bit of disrespect back in 2016. And so she said, all right, you know what? I'm going to put out a country album, and she's going to do it her way. And lo and behold, the country music gatekeepers refused to play her music on CMA. I believe the country music TV station that has the videos, they didn't claim it was country. Then they put it back on. And all due to the fact that she is not a young white woman with a twang in her voice. But if you listen to her, the woman is from Texas. Her family is from the South. She has her roots there. That's where they've grown up. So she's by no means trying to perpetrate somebody from the South. And then on top of that, she's a black artist, which means that her musical roots are such that she's not intruding on anything. She's coming back home. And one of the things that has been abundantly clear is the misrepresentation of the black art form of music within country music and the just denial of its roots. It's quite disturbing. And I mean, you see it all the time in various art forms where the art form transcends where it came from and starts to look a lot different. You see it within hip hop, you see it within rock and roll, you see it within jazz, you see it within punk and various other forms of musical genres where the people who started it and either the races or the cultures that were the ones that, got it going are now like kind of foreigners in that land. So, let's see. I just want to read a quick article here, but I do want to point out something that for me, I haven't listened to the album yet. There's so many albums that I need to listen to right now. I just haven't gotten around to it, but I'm quite sure in the future I will. I'm listening to Babyface's album from 2022, Girls Night Out. It's a banger. You got to check it out. It's not like Babyface. He's not back because he never left, But the album for Beyonce with her, Cowboy Carter, it's interesting because here you have an artist that is world renowned, that is known everywhere, has won literally every award. I believe her husband is a billionaire 2 times over. She herself, her net worth is close to $1 billion. You just, only in America, right? Could you ever reach those sort of heights? But not all is all and good in the hood, as it were. And there have been some detractors. And so I'm going to read this article here. It is from The Guardian. It was written by, I want to make sure I get this name right, Yasmin Williams, and she is a staff writer with The Guardian. She wrote this on Tuesday the 2nd, April April 2024, so just last month. So the title says here, Beyonce's country album drowns out the black music history it claims to celebrate. For all her declarations of being authentically country, Cowboy Carter arrives on the back of booming business for the genre and is all about the star, not the roots. Music supposedly at the... For all her declarations of being authentically country, Cowboy Carter arrives on the back of booming business for the genre and is all about the star, not the roots. The music supposedly is supposed to be at the project's heart. Okay. So on the first track of Beyonce's new album, she seems to state the impetus behind the project. They used to say I spoke too country, then the rejection came and I wasn't country enough. That rejection was an unnamed experience in which she said she did not feel welcomed, assumed to be her performance of her song Daddy Lessons with the Chicks at the 2016 Country Music Awards. It prompted a racist backlash from parts of the country establishment, as well as outrage at Beyonce giving a platform to the Chicks, who had been in exile for the industry since singer Natalie Maines criticized George W. Bush's handling of the war. They're still pissed at that? Gosh damn. I thought I could hold a grudge. Holy crap. Cowboy Carter is Beyonce's 27-track response. On the album's cover, she is on a horse, holding an American flag draped in the U.S. flag apparel, with her long blonde tresses flowing and a cowboy hat atop her head. In the few details she has shared about the album, she said she did a deeper dive into the history of country music and studied our rich musical archive, as she became the first black female artist to have a U.S. country #1 and top the Billboard 100 with a country song, and debate over her place in the genre reigned. No greater a country luminary than Dolly Parton lent her support. Later it was revealed that she and the outlaw legend Willie Nelson were to feature on the album, cementing its country bona fides. I'm an international touring acoustic guitarist from Virginia who has studied American vernacular music. The promise of Beyonce's country album was exciting to me, as were the personnel on its two lead singles, the musician scholar Riona Giddens playing banjo and violin, and voila, Texas Hold'em, and pedal steel player Robert Randolph of the Sacred Steel tradition. The Southern Black Pentecostal church music dating back to the 1930s appears on 16 Carriages. These are black country and folk artists who work within black traditional lineages that deserve to be highlighted and celebrated for their specificity. There you go. However, on hearing Cowboy Carter this weekend, I felt as though little work had been done to utilize the breadth of knowledge of Beyonce's collaborators or the black country traditional music communities at large. Beyonce settled for using Giddens' banjo and Randolph's pedal steel as props to back up the overall production on the record, instead of boosting these traditions to the forefront on the album with an artificial sheen. Moreover, it felt in greater conversation with an exclusionary mainstream and like a capitalist gesture to insert itself into that world. Ahead of release, Beyonce stated that Cowboy Carter was a Beyonce album, not a country album, and that she sings what she wants when she wants. And that the genres are meaningless. She even uses an interlude by Lindy Marshall, the first black female solo artist to play at the Grand Ole Opry, to restate this. Genres are a funny little concept, aren't they? Yes, they are, Marshall says on the song Spaghetti. In theory, they have a simple definition that's easy to understand, but in practice, well, some may feel confined. As Giddens puts it in a recent article for The Guardian, tradition is shaped according to the inner logic of specific communities through long processes of creative engagement. Genre, on the other hand, is a product of capitalism and people with access to power to create it, to control it, and to maintain it in order to commodify it. Despite Cowboy Carter's use of funk, psychedelic, and even Jersey Club, Beyonce's flagrant leaning on country aesthetics to establish this album has been markedly different from her previous records suggests. An artist conforming to the standards of the latter category in order to cash in on the growing popularity of country music. Billboard reported that country music consumption was up 20.3% year on year in the first half of 2023, thanks to the success of records by Wallen, Luke Combs, Zach Bryan, and Bailey Zimmerman. Later that year came controversial singer number one singles from Jason Aldean and Oliver Anthony. In their wake, major artists are muscling in. Post Malone has teased the release of a forthcoming country album. Lana Del Rey has also announced a country record. Lasso, for release this summer. Cowboy Carter hardly seems different from those attempts to capitalize on the genre's prominence. What other reason is there to include guest spots from Post Malone and Miley Cyrus, both white artists who have piggybacked on hip-hop aesthetics to gain success and relevance before later criticizing the genre? It seems incredulous given Beyonce's lauded work to give black artists its due, as does the news that Post Malone is set to collaborate with country star Morgan Wallen, who was caught on video in 2021 using a racial slur and briefly penalized by the industry, only to return to the top of the charts and break records with his 2023 album One Thing at a Time, became the longest-running U.S. #1 country album. The swift recovery of his career demonstrates the double standards for white male artists, and that everyone else within the country music industry. And Beyonce singing a dreadful duet with Post Malone about Levi jeans is not tradition. It's an advertisement that exploits a certain aesthetic, much like her Black Panther-esque uniform in the 2016 Super Bowl. Her attempts at country-style storytelling also missed the mark. 16 Carriages immediately reminds me of Merrill Travis's hit 16 Tons. They're both autobiographical testimonies to hardship and sacrifice, singing about his family's life in the Kentucky coal mines. Merrill sings, "I loaded 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt." I remember that song. On 16 Carriages, Beyonce sings about her young touring life with Destiny's Child on the back of a bus. In a bunk with a band, as hard as I know bus life can be, Beyonce's hardships are a Hollywood version of the working person's reality. "I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when. I'm stuck in Folsom Prison and time keeps dragging on." Johnny Cash croons in the Folsom Prison Blues. AOTY, "I Ain't Win," Beyonce laments in Sweet Honey Buckin', referring to the fact that she never won the Grammy for Album of the Year despite being the award's most garlanded musician. The difference in lyricism displays the changing ethos in country music, from authentically magnifying the underclass experience to a shortcut to perceived authenticity. Beyonce's larger-than-life persona feels at odds with the tradition itself. Take her rewrite of Dolly Parton's Jolene. In the original, Parton is vulnerable and powerless in the face of a woman who she thinks capable of luring her man away. Beyonce turns the song into a fiery warning shot, stripping out the tension that has made the original endure for more than 50 years in favor of a poppy satire statement of dominance. Even as an album fusion genres, Cowboy Carter lacks the execution of a record such as Ray Charles' Modern Sounds in country and Western music. Modern Sounds rework country standards into pop, jazz, and R&B songs, forms by fusing the older traditions of country Western music with the more modern popular music at the time. Perhaps if Cowboy Carter had featured more working-class black country artists or leaned on the scholarship of the likes of Dom Fellmans, formerly of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, or collectively as Black Opry, which represents black artists, fans, and industry workers, or the now-defunct Black Country Music Association of the 90s, it might have been as thrilling as it was supposed to sound. As been the case since her 2013 self-titled album, Beyonce has remained secretive about how the album was made, making it hard to see anything or in any culture other than Beyonce's herself as the central figure of Cowboy Carter. It's unfortunate. The album would have benefited from decentering its superstar and letting the experts she trusted to join her in creating an album to shine brighter. As it stands, it feels as though Beyonce has put the Carter before the horse. Ooh! Love that ending. Carter before the horse. I see what you did there. That's pretty good. But that article was written, again, like I said, by Miss Yasmin Williams, and I will put her information in the notes there if you're interested in checking out more of her work. But it just goes to show you that within the culture we're in today, there's a lot of melding of things together. And I think, and this is coming from a person who hasn't heard the album yet, but has just heard a few songs online and on the radio, I can definitely say that any artist should be allowed to create in whatever genre they want to create in. It shouldn't be that you have to be of this background, of this, of this look to partake in it. But I've often said it's kind of like the Eminem Eminem theory, as it were. So growing up, Eminem, right, or even like a Big Pun, were both artists that I loved growing up. I still love their music to this day. But both Eminem and Big Pun are not black. They are Big Pun, Christopher Rios, rest in peace, was of Puerto Rican descent. And Eminem was a white gentleman raised in the 8 Mile of Detroit, the wrong side of the tracks, if you would. Now, both of these individuals, in my opinion, were some of the most dynamic and most prolific artists of our time period. Big Pun and Eminem have created moments with their lyrics, with their albums. And unfortunately, Big Pun only had 2 studio albums. He died due to just his battle with suffering from obesity and suffered heart complications and left us far too soon. Eminem almost went the same way, but with his addiction to pills after the death of his bandmate, from D12, Proof, who was shot and killed over, a lot of people said it was jealousy because he and the rest of the Dirty Dozen had gotten on with Eminem, and now they were famous basically. But what transpired was 2 artists that were not black but were of the culture. And what I mean by that, when I say it's not always the color, it's the culture, is that Eminem and Big Pun were raised within the stew and the smell and the feel and the touch and the texture of what is hip hop. Being raised in the South Bronx like Big Pun was, and going to the bodegas and just being a part of it didn't always necessarily meant you had to be of the same color. I've literally watched traveling shows with my wife or friends, and you go to like a place where there's this a dark-skinned black dude, and he's speaking with the most posh British accent you could possibly think of, or a white lady. I'll never forget this. I was watching a show from back in the day called Globe Trekkers with Ian McKellen. Not Ian McKellen, but it was a show back in the 90s where you could learn how to travel on the cheap, and there was this white lady with the thickest patois Jamaican accent you ever heard in your life. And if you closed your eyes, you'd swear you were listening to like Bob Marley's mom or something. But she was raised in the yard. She was raised up the road. She knew about plantain and saltfish and, and Eddos and all this stuff. And it's like, you could feel the Jamaican radiating off of her. And this woman was as white as snow. Dreadlocks were bleached blonde, but this woman was would cuss you out in patois no problem. And so there's that feeling of real appreciation and love and care and respect for the culture that if you are born in it, bred in it, stewed in it, raised in it, then you'll get a pass because people will see that you're authentic. And I think what we're seeing with the Carter album in particular is that while Beyonce is from Texas and while her roots are of that, people just aren't buying the aesthetic that she's claiming to put on. Like I was born in Canada. I'm not Grenadian, I'm not Trinidadian. So if I were to go back there and try to put on a fake accent and pretend like I was raised there, they're going to smell it on you. They're going to realize, oh, you're not from around here. You weren't raised with the certain characteristics of what you would see as somebody from the Caribbean. One of my former bosses in particular is from Mumbai. And he told me that even when you're raised there and you come away and then you go back to visit, you don't even smell the same, right? It's just something in the water, in the air, in the food. It's just being immersed in that people could sense, oh, you're not from around here. Okay. Oh, you're traveling. Okay. Blah, 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 whatever. And that's true as it was yesterday as it is today. And so culture is something that you just can't really fake. And I feel right now, particularly in black music, whatever part of the diaspora of the black experience you want to talk about, there is this almost this sense of loss when we're talking about the black art form of country music, because it's been so proliferated by the white aesthetic. It's been so determined to look like a Reba McEntire or a Johnny Cash or a Vince Gill or whomever else. And it's not the fault of those singers or those songwriters, but I think what we need to kind of begin to reclaim back, if you are somebody of color, is the true nature of what country music is, or what country culture is. And unfortunately, there's a lot of overlap between country music and the Confederate flag, country music and racism, country music and Jim Crow, which was just a horrific form of segregation that went on in the Deep South, before the Civil Rights Movement. And this idea that it's very, very hard to separate, as she said, the horse from the carriage. It was very, very hard to separate the racism and bigotry that I saw growing up with the country music that, I see today. There have been moves to kind of remove that sort of attitude from country music and all the things that delve into country, quote unquote, culture. So a great example of that was a few years ago, Bubba Smith. I hope I'm saying his name right. He is a half black NASCAR racer who was able to get the Confederate flag removed from NASCAR. See here. So the display of the Confederate flag will be prohibited from all NASCAR events and properties. The move comes amid social unrest around the globe following the death in police custody of George Floyd, an unarmed black man, on May the 25th in Minneapolis. So we're coming up of the 4-year anniversary of that tomorrow. And because of that, back in June 10th of 2020, NASCAR banned the Confederate flag from all racetracks. And that was a huge part of, quote unquote, country culture, if you would. NASCAR, bull riding, the rodeo. I mean, right now, my wife has brought our kids to what is known as the Pound Makers Rodeo out in adjacent to one of the towns just like 2 minutes outside of Edmonton, basically. And I remember going to that rodeo many years ago. Like, it was a good 10 plus years ago, and thinking, like, what am I doing here? This is a rodeo, or monster truck rallies, or, things that were traditionally seen as white spaces, like hockey and everything else. And I remember being shocked to see other black people there. And I was like, what the hell? Oh my gosh, it's another black dude there, So I guess, not in closing, because there's a lot more to discuss about this topic, but I think in trying to fit in, we could find ourselves in a precarious sort of space. And what I mean by that is, if you're not part of a culture, but you love that culture, you should do your best to learn about it and really delve into it. So I love drumming. I'm a drummer. I play the drums. I don't have a current set right now because, they're expensive, and I'm saving up to get a kit. But I love playing the drums. I love playing chess. I love boxing. It's a great form of exercise. I love video games and all these sort of things. And each of those have their own specific culture and subcultures and cultures within cultures. So a great example is drumming, for example. You have drummers who play pop drummers. You have country drummers. You have death metal drummers. You have drummers who play metal. You have drummers who play just jazz. You have drummers who refuse to play on electric kits. Some who some who are drummers for marching bands or orchestras and things of that nature. And then you got studio drummers or rock drummers. And some people swear by certain sticks or certain skins for their snares. And some people swear by certain cymbals, and they won't use another type of a brand when it comes to playing the drums. So there's a large how can I put it? There's a large culture that we have to really look upon and realize that if we're going to be a part of it, we need to be honest about it. And I think that's what a lot of people are not seeing with Beyonce. They're like, okay, we get that you're from Texas and you have this love and this appreciation of this culture, but are you really a part of it? And is this just something that you're doing, you're dipping your toes in, but what are the long-term, effects going forward for other country artists who are black who want to have a space in this genre? So, but like I said before, time will tell. And again, this is not the end that we'll probably hear of this album. But until next time, I want you guys to take care out there. Know that you could find the Marketplace of Ideas podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're talking Google Play until June the 23rd here in Canada. We're talking iTunes, YouTube. Check us out there. But until next time, take care. Be good to one another out there. And keep your stick on the ice. Peace.